What if we started this by saying the compressor was the best gun of 2022? It's not, it was released 2021 with Urelli, but this thing was basically just a bubble gun. Is lots of fun, depends what missions you're actually doing, but oh, I just saw this thing and thought, it literally has, this is where the soap sits, and that's where the air is blown from that side. It's a bubble shooter. I do this every year. I have missed the first few years and I'm still trying to figure out what happened to 2018, but my top 5 weapons of 2022. Now the year is coming to an end. Now the end is coming to a year is what I was literally about to say, but there hasn't really been a great deal of new weaponry this year. I would love to turn around and say, for this list, we're going to ignore the primes, we're going to ignore tenet weapons, because they are better versions of already existing weapons. But, and this is going in here under protest, because probably, arguably, number 1 or 2 on my list would have to be the Phantasma Prime. It is possibly the best weapon that was actually added to Warframe in 2022, because it is just a beast. No video on that exists on this channel. That is for other reasons. Maybe one day we'll have to see. But just because I want to add at least one Prime to this list, I'd love it to be this, but I could not bring myself to make this number 5 on this list because it is so good. So we'll jump into number 5, the Aphurus Prime. These are only on here because they were good and I really wanted them to be in the list just because of how huge of a surprise that it was. They took the original Aphurus that was basically a starter weapon. There was the Dex Furus that was good 9 years ago, and it comes back every late March because it's an anniversary weapon, and they made it better in every single way. It's never going to be good for high level weaponry stuff or high level enemy stuff, but damn, the Aphurus Prime. It was probably the biggest surprise when it comes to Prime weaponry in a long time. I expected them to be complete rubbish, and they really did amaze me. One day I would love to get a Riven for these that would make them so much better. I know some people who have one, and yes, I'd love to turn around and say, ooh, can I just borrow that? And ooh, it would be too tempting to want to keep it. So I don't really want to borrow one, I want to try and find one. I may start opening Rivens, see if I can't get one for these, because god damn, these things were probably one of the biggest surprises in 2022. Hence, number 5. In at number 4 has to be the Hesper. This is the first heavy scythe they have ever added to the game. It looks amazing, it performs great, and that stance mod for this, just the chance of getting it is next to non-existent, which for the record is why I have 2 of these, because I couldn't get the stance to drop, so I had to go and I actually bought the pack from the website using real money so I could get a hold of the stance for this thing. It drops from the Coover enemy, the crewman, and whatever the Halcyon has written the rest of it off on Zariman, but Gale Force Dawn was, I just couldn't get it to drop. It was another one of those melee weapons where it's not an outstandingly high power melee weapon, 280 total damage, I think it was 24% crit chance, 2.2 times crit multiplier, 28% status chance. It's the fact that it is a heavy weapon, that is a hard hitting, and the heavy damage is 1680 times 3. Whereas its normal damage is only 280, it's the attack speed of 1 that made this thing such a great melee weapon. I wish it was higher up on the list, but sadly, it just couldn't be. In at number 3 for, to be fair, nothing more than the cosmetic look of it, has to be the Ultinox. It's not an amazingly damaging weapon. It is highly status based, being 30% status, solely electrical damage. It really doesn't do a great deal of damage unless you fire the ball out with the end, and then it does a lot more damage. But no matter how you fire it, it still works pretty well. It's not the most accurate of things. It's Gaia's signature weapon that has 2 fire modes, and in Gaia's hand the weapon has a small amount of multi-shot. Throw a multi-shot on there and the multi-shot actually kind of goes up. It doesn't have any multi-shot if it's not in Gaia's hands, by the way, or you put multi-shot on it. It is just solely down to the way this thing looks. It's stuck in my head so much. I had to choose between that and the Airlac. The Airlac I did like a lot, but the Ultinox, it was just more visually appealing than this thing was. This just looked like another Grenier weapon that they'd given a second thought about and went, oh yeah, we'll just throw that in there. Whereas the Ultinox just looks so much better, which is the only reason it's number 3, because it does a nice amount of damage, not a great deal. Again, if I wasn't ignoring Tenet weapons and I wasn't putting prime weapons in, this wouldn't be on the list. This in fact should have been number 4, but I made it number 3 because it looks better. The Hesper is a better weapon than this in every way, but this just looks nice. It's the first time I think they've actually spent time detailing a weapon in such a dramatic way in so long. It deserved to be that one little place higher, but only just. Which leads us on to number 2, and I have to put an Incarnon weapon on this list, but I have a problem. I'm not going for the Praetos. It's a good melee weapon, but to be fair, out of all of the Incarnon weapons, the Praetos and the Inodem, that's the dagger that's... Those are really useful if you run them in the secondary, but there is tonfas that are just slightly better than that all of the time. These are only good at certain times, so that kind of rules out melee. Plus, I really don't want 3 melees on this list. I've already got 2, which is kind of a spoiler, but especially considering this is number 2. The pistols, I loved this pistol. Out of the original 3 that dropped, this was better than the melee. I loved this thing a lot. Oh, and then there's the Fenmore. This thing, I love it. Incarnon weapons, I wish they would add an option in here for us to show them in their Incarnon forms. But in at number 2 has to be the Fairlax. Simply because this thing turns into a pair of pistols at the hands of the Void, and they do so quite well. I'm wondering how the hell I'm going to actually get footage of that where I want to get footage of that, because the Incarnon weapons are so annoying to try and get pictures of, because you have to get certain parameters before you can transform them. But the Fairlax has to be, in my opinion, and nothing more than that, the second best of the Incarnon weapons. That's right, I'm saying the second best, but it is in second place on this list. I do think the Fenmore might be slightly better, but the Fairlax, in my opinion, I preferred using these more because, well, it's a shotgun that turns into a pair of shotgun-wielding pistols, so multi-shot the hell out of it. It already has a multi-shot of 4, so that goes up a lot. And crit build them because, well, it doesn't really have a great deal of status, but it does have a starting damage of 760. And that goes up. And that should technically be per projectile. And you've got a multi-shot of 4, so that's 760 times 4, and then when you add more multi-shot, that number just goes up. because it's firing more projectiles, because shotguns do that. The more projectiles it shoots, the more damage it does. I'm kind of not going down the route of trying to overly explain multi-shot. For shotguns, it works per projectile, so you want as much multi-shot as possible, so you're firing as many rounds at once. Auto-firing pistols, primaries, or anything else, yes, multi-shot works completely different. But for a shotgun, it's every time you fire, more multi-shot equals more rounds. The damage is worked out per projectile, so for every little projectile you can shoot out at once, it works better. Hence it has a starting multi-shot of 4. And when it transforms, oh, this thing just becomes so much more fun. But I just wish it had such a much higher fire rate once it's transformed, because, yeah, the magazine on it kind of sucks. And the pistols, they don't last that long, and same problem. The fire rate on them could have been better. Which is why I think the other primary is better. The Fenmore, definitely better than the Fairlax. I just like the Fairlax because I love dual wielding weaponry anyway. We also need more tenet weapons. Oh, the tenet plank should be on this list so badly. It would have been, because it was released this year, and the tenet planks is amazing over the normal planks. But it wasn't. Well, it is, but it's a tenet weapon, and I don't want to have a list full of better versions of weapons that came out years ago, which we could easily do. Which means that it wasn't actually released in 2022, which is what the loophole is. I'm just throwing the primes on because, well, technically the prime was dropped this year, so it was a tenet, but it was so amazing to actually see how well those things worked. But we could do lots of stalling and everything else. Number 1, the Seraphang. I am aware Verona's sniper rifle is much better for long range, but for close range, and you all knew this was coming, I mentioned melee before, this thing, just the heavy slam attack that creates a vortex that pulls in enemies that are lifted. That's the bit that always gets me about this. They have to be in the air to be sucked into it. But it also only works when the combo multiplier builds to 8, which is why in Verona's hands it requires a 5 times combo multiplier instead to get the vortex to work. I think it was about a week of using this before I actually saw that vortex work for the first time. But the Seraphang brought something to Warframe we haven't had in way too long. A heavy axe that has... It's kind of well balanced at 20% crit chance and 20% status. It has 200 damage, mostly slash with a bit of impact, and let's be honest, that 8 puncture is... I guess that means it does have puncture, but it's got 8 puncture. 8 is just so small, it's not even worth mentioning, until obviously you mod it and that 8 does go up. But it's the 1.17 attack speed that this has. They finally released a heavy weapon, and this was one of the reasons the big heavy scythe didn't end up higher on the list than 4th. The Hesper is good, it has a nice attack speed. This may do a little bit less damage, but at 1.17 attack speed, yeah. Less damage, more DPS. But at close range, give me a shotgun any day of the week. And the Fairlax, well, it's a shotgun primary that turns into a dual wielding shotgun secondary. Much better than the Fenmore, though once the Fenmore transforms. I cannot choose between the two, hence I sided with the one that I like the best. And the Seraphang, simply down number 1, as it has a 1.17 attack speed. It may only have 20% crit chance, 20% status, but I could not get over how nicer it was to use this with a high attack speed without having to put 2 or 3 mods into it to increase the attack speed. The Hesper, throw attack speed mods on that, that thing is insane. But you do sacrifice damage to do so. This, you just have to go for the damage side of things, and it is so much better. So that's kind of my list. Do you agree? Do you not? Let me know in the comment section below. What was your top 5 weapons? Ignoring Tenet and Primes? I'm saying that with a question mark because the Aphirus Prime did make it to the bottom of this list. Even though I really wish that was the Phantasma. Phantasma should have been number 1. I preferred that this year over everything else that came out. But ignoring the Tenet and the Primes, and only picking one Incarnate weapon, what would your top 5 list be for the top 5 weapons in 2022? Let me know in the comment section below. And with that, we'll leave this off here. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.